The background of this case is that the Pensacola Surgery Centers are a chain of 6 ambulatory surgery centers in the Florida Panhandle, and they are investor-owned. Gary Hudson, he's the new COO and CFO of the Pensacola Surgery Centers. His credentials, he has a bachelor's degree in business and a master's degree in health services administration. His previous job experience, he was a special projects coordinator and financial analyst at a large Miami hospital. Gary wanted to gain experience in a smaller healthcare business where he would have more responsibility and authority. Next slide. Gary had 3 major decisions to make when he took on this job. The first one is that he needs to invest $50,000 in a low-risk short-term security, such as a CD, to accumulate funds for future use. The interest from this CD will be reinvested. The second decision he has to make is in 5 years, the company will need to replace its current hardware software system, and it's estimated to cost $200,000. To make sure that the funds will be available, Gary plans to either deposit a lump sum today in an interest-bearing account or to make annual payments into the same account. The third decision he needs to make is that he needs to decide if it will be profitable to spend $40,000 on some renovations in order to lease space from one of the locations for 5 years. Next slide.
So with problem number 1, it says to consider the $50,000 excess cash and assume that Gary wants to invest those funds in a 1-year CD. So for part A of problem 1, it says what is the CD's value at maturity, the future value, if it pays 10% annual interest. So to find the future, what the $50,000 would be given that information, into Excel using the FV function, just using the $50,000 as the present value, 1 as your end value or your time value, and 10% as the interest. And on part B, it says what will its future value be if the CD pays 5% interest, if it pays 15% interest. And so you just use the same information from part A with the $50,000 and the 1-year time, and you simply plug in 5% for the first future value, or FV2 on this slide, and for the second one, FV3, you use the interest rate of 15%. Next slide. Problem number 2 is the exact same thing as problem number 1. You just rework the problem, but you change the time frame from a 1-year maturity to a 5-year maturity. And so you simply change the end value or the time value from 1 to 5 using the same FV function in Excel for part A, as well as the same function for part B, substituting 5 years as the end value, as well as 5% interest for the first future value that it asks for, FV2, and 15% interest for FV3. Next slide.
All right, problem 3 asks you to find what amount you need to invest now to be able to have $200,000 accumulate 5 years from now. You can plug it into Excel and use the PV function, and you use $200,000 as the future value, and 10% is your interest rate, and then your NPV or your time is 5 years, and you get the PV of $124,184. And then problem B has you see what you need, what interest rate you need to be able to turn $100,000 into $200,000 5 years from now. So you use the rate function in Excel, and you put the $200,000 as your future value and $100,000 as your present value, and then your time period is 5. And you just have to remember to put in either the future value or the present value as a negative number so you don't get a weird rate. Next slide.
So for problem 4, I wanted us to figure out what kind of annuity we were looking for in the question, and so we figured it was a future value annuity. And then for question B, we wanted to know what the annual, with an annual interest rate, what the value would be with a $32,000 payment. And so you put in, just in Excel, you use the present value function, and the number of payments is 5 with an interest rate of 10 for the annual. And then for the semi-annual, you use the same, but instead of the same 32,000, and then instead you do the number of payments is 10 and the interest is 5%. And I got that, how to figure that out on page 317 of the book. It talks about how you do your number of periods and then you multiply that by how many times you're compounding. So for semi-annual, you're compounding twice. So 5 times 2 is 10. And then for the interest rate, you take your interest rate and you divide it by the number of times you're compounding, and that would be 5, since you're going 10 divided by 2 equals 5. And so those are the present value answers. And then it asks us about the future value. So you use the future value formula in Excel. And you do the same thing to figure the number of payments as well as the interest rate. And so those are the answers I got there. And then it wanted to know what the interest would be with the numbers given. And so you use the rate formula that Rebecca just talked about. And the interest I got was 11%. And then you do what they wanted to know how much the payment needed to be to reach that that value that they give in the question. And I used the payment formula in Excel for that.
So problem 6, it's asking you to find the present value of the annual lease cash flow if the opportunity cost is 10% annually. So the textbook directs us on page 311 to use the NPV function in Excel. And so you just put 10% in as your rate and then select the range of cash flows as your value 1. And it gives you 47,328 as your NPV. And part B or part C asks you to decide if this would be beneficial for the company or not. And we believe that it would be, because the renovation costs would be $40,000, and they would make that back and some within those 5 short years. Next slide.
For question 7, we are asked to calculate the interest and principal balance if the company were to borrow $200,000 for 4 years at 10%. So to do that, we built an amortization table, and there is a link right here that can help you create such a table. Next. So here's the table. For 4 years, it shows the payment and the interest and the principal balance and the ending balance for each year. So you know that you will get that table right when at the end of the year you got a balance of 0. So this is what we did with Excel. It's pretty simple. That's pretty much our presentation, and thank you for watching. If you have any questions, you can just post it on the discussion board. Thank you.